It was a cold November evening in 1927. An old man, wrapping his worn-out coat tightly around him, began to descend the narrow stairs leading to the basement. The dampness and musty smell of the house were burning his lungs. He held an old gas lamp, the only source of light in the basement. The feeble light could only illuminate a small portion of the darkness. With each step down the stairs, the old man grew more tense. When he reached the basement, he hung the lamp on a nail on the wall and looked around. The basement was dark and dusty. The walls were covered in cobwebs. The old man walked towards an old chest sitting in the corner. He opened the lid and pulled out a bundle of papers. The papers were old and worn out. The old man began to carefully examine the papers. The papers told the tragic story of a family who had lived in this house centuries ago. The head of the family was a wealthy and respected man. He had a wife and 2 children, and they lived happily and peacefully. However, one day, a horrific event occurred in the basement of the house. The head of the family was mysteriously murdered in the basement. The perpetrator of the crime was never found. After this incident, the family fell apart. The wife and children left the house. The house remained empty for years. After reading the papers, the old man felt deep sadness. He knew that this house had a dark history, but he hadn't expected such a tragic event. The old man began to believe that there was a curse on the basement of the house. This curse would haunt the family forever. The old man put the papers back into the chest and left the basement. The cold and gloomy atmosphere of the house made him even more uneasy. He wanted to leave this house as soon as possible. He went upstairs, grabbed his coat, and left the house. The cold night air hit his face. The old man took a deep breath and started walking without looking back. He vowed never to return to this house. As the old man walked away from the street, he heard a window opening in the basement of the house behind him. A cold draft came from the window. The old man turned around and looked at the window. There was a dark figure standing in front of the window. He couldn't see the face of the figure. The old man froze in fear. A few seconds later, the figure disappeared from the window. The old man found it hard to believe what he had seen. Who was the dark figure? Was there really a curse in this house? The old man never found the answers to these questions. After this incident, he spent the rest of his life in fear and anxiety. The dark figure he saw in the basement haunted him forever. The identity of the dark figure and the true cause of the mystery in the basement of the house remain unknown. The basement of the old and dilapidated building was dark and damp. The walls were covered in cobwebs, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold. Only a few brave souls dared to step foot into this eerie atmosphere where an unsettling presence seemed to linger. One night, a young woman named Jessica made the decision to venture into this ominous basement. She was a historian searching for traces of an old family rumored to have had their last member commit suicide in this very basement. With hopes of uncovering clues about the family's past, Jessica steeled herself to confront the darkness. Armed with a feeble flashlight, she began to explore the basement. Old furniture, dusty boxes, and unused items cluttered every corner. Jessica felt uneasy with every step she took. Suddenly, she heard a rustling from the darkness. She paused, straining her ears. The sound came again, closer this time. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She was frozen with fear. She looked around, but could see nothing in the darkness. Suddenly, she noticed a shadow on the wall moving. It seemed to be reaching out towards her. With a scream, Jessica began to run backward. The light from her flashlight trembled, making the shadows even more sinister. As she panically ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the basement, she searched for a way out. Suddenly, a hand reached out from behind and touched her shoulder. Jessica froze and turned around. Before her stood the ghostly figure of an old woman. The woman's face was pale, and her eyes were dark. Jessica found herself unable to breathe from fear. In a trembling voice, the ghost spoke, "Why have you come here?" Jessica, her throat constricted with fear, replied, "I'm searching for my family." Anger flashed across the ghost's face. "Get out! "Leave us alone," she hissed. Unable to bear any more, Jessica screamed and ran from the basement. She dared not look back. As she emerged from the building into the cold night air, Jessica knew she would never forget the terror she experienced that night. She never did uncover the identity or desires of the mysterious entity in the basement. The flickering beam of my flashlight barely illuminated the darkness of the basement floor. The air was heavy with moisture and the smell of mold in the dusty atmosphere. With each step, the creaking of the wooden stairs echoed like an eerie melody. There was an indescribable fear in my heart, yet my curiosity had drawn me here. This was the basement of my grandfather's old house. Abandoned years ago, it was a place submerged in darkness and dust. No one dared to venture down here, until I succumbed to the allure of its mysterious tales. Since childhood, I had heard the chilling stories associated with this basement. My grandfather would recount a gruesome incident that occurred here. One night, the maid of the house was found dead in this basement. She had inexplicably drowned, her lifeless body lying at the foot of the stairs. Since that day, this place had been referred to as cursed. To conquer my curiosity, one night I decided to sneak down into the basement. Armed with an old flashlight, I carried an inexplicable fear in my heart. With each step, the creaking stairs and the depths of darkness sent shivers down my spine. As I descended into the basement, I was met with a dusty, cobweb-covered environment. The old paintings on the walls seemed to be watching me. A suffocating silence hung in the air. Only the faint crackle of the flashlight and the pounding of my heart could be heard. In one corner, I saw an old chest. Yielding to my curiosity, I decided to open it. As I lifted the lid, a lock of human hair and a moldy wedding dress emerged. They belonged to the maid. Suddenly, I remembered what had happened that night and who had killed her. At that moment, I felt a shiver down my spine. Quickly turning around, I aimed the flashlight into the darkness. But there was no one there. Suddenly, the flashlight went out. The surroundings were engulfed in pitch-black mist. A cold draft sent shivers down my spine. I heard whispers, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. Paralyzed with fear, I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I saw two glowing red eyes shining in the darkness. The eyes were approaching me. Frozen with fear, my breath caught in my throat. The eyes drew closer, and I woke up, finding myself in my bed. Everything felt like a dream, but it was so realistic that my heart was still racing. Looking around, I saw the flashlight still in my hand. It was a dream, perhaps, but there was still a lingering feeling inside me that there was something mysterious in that basement. Maybe in those dark corridors, an unknown entity was lurking. After that incident, I never set foot in the basement again. The stories my grandfather told and the terrifying dream I experienced were enough to keep me away from that cursed place.
Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe.